When I knew this interview was coming, I did want to start by playing something, because I have this belief music therapists talk too much. The music is what we do, and music should speak perhaps more importantly than we speak. And it was interesting, that experience, because I tried to be blank. I tried to cut off any immediate feelings of what am I going to do now, which is very similar when you work with clients. You want to be open to them. So I was open to this experience, knowing that I'd agreed to play, but it became very clearly self-therapy for me, and I wasn't intending it to do. And I think that's because I've been thinking a lot about this idea of being displaced, and having just got back from England, where I feel I'm really at one with who I am, and then coming back to Canada, where I kind of feel British Canadian, displaced, and that always happened as a period. So that music was really a longing for back home, which is why it was very simple. It was not complicated, and I am very much caught up as a composer with English composers, and Michael Tippett is a huge fan, and so that opening chord comes from his second piano sonata, and it's sort of been in my head, and I kind of knew that that was going to be an anchor for that experience. But it actually became much more emotional for me than I thought, oh, I'm just going to play, but it was interesting. I let go to the music, which again has connections with therapy, and one hopes that the client can let go into the music, that the music becomes one with them and you together. It's very different if you're the therapist, because you wouldn't self-therapize. The therapist can't do that, but in that moment it was certainly that. But it's a very interesting feeling, and again it's one the clients hopefully have, is the sense that I started very concrete with the music, and then I became apart from it. I was almost watching myself play. And I remember thinking at some point, do I want to move it into something faster? And I knew that I just wanted to be calm and serene and simple. And so I didn't fight it, but I was looking in on myself playing. It almost felt as though the music was in control of me and my emotions rather than the other way around. When I worked in palliative care, I would self-therapize at the end of most days. I would actually do that. And then it would be a way for me to end the day and to let go. I don't know how many music therapists do actually do it, but I think potentially it's a very important experience to have, because you're giving out all day to other people. You know, at the end of the day, to make music for yourself is kind of crucial, I think. And I believe music therapists should have this sacrosanct time at the beginning of the day, be it 30 minutes. I used to do an hour, where I would, to clear myself musically and emotionally, I would practice playing. And the way I would do it would be to play Bach. Bach for me is a spiritual cleanser. And so I think therapists' duty to our clients is to cleanse ourselves and be open of who we are as human beings and musicians in a way, so that we can facilitate the client's needs. I really see myself as a composer music therapist. Now you might say, by putting composer first and music therapist second, it's like, well, perhaps music therapist composer, but the musician side of me is so important, and my whole philosophy being in music therapy is that the quality of the music that we bring into the therapeutic space is essential. Which links back to Bach, because I don't see the music of Bach in a way being any different than the improvisations I use. He wrote this music, and Bach's a wonderful example because of all the composers, he's the most spiritual, the most divine, the most ordered, the most beautiful crafted music, in my opinion. So Bach becomes like my therapeutic ally. He helps me to be in that music space because of the sheer genius and purity of his music. I mean, if I go back to my musical roots and how I got to this place of improvising, I think it's really important to put it into context. I was always very much at the forefront of modern music. I was into Boulez and Stockhausen, aleatoric and atonality. I was very excited about pushing the boundaries, and so the music could be chaotic, and the second Viennese school was, I loved it more than Bach or the Romantic school at that time. There was something in the avant-garde in me that wanted to do that. So when I came into therapy, I in a way wanted to bring that world in. But what I realized, and I'm talking about music therapy improvisation. I'm not, because improvisation as an artistic medium incorporates a huge range. Some people have a very, even now a lot of improvisers have this very stylistic way of playing that doesn't have much melody, that doesn't have form, that really I see as splashes of sound. It's very unordered in a way, in the way it's being. But the most important thing for using improvisation in therapy is form. Formless music doesn't work with clients. Artistically, it might work. So what happened in my development as a therapist was I began to realize that all the music I left behind, I needed to bring back for my clients. So it is emerging. And that's the wonderful thing. And that's why also being a composer and an improviser is a wonderful thing, because you're composing this emergent musical form, not only for yourself, but for the client as well. So you're allowing the client to be in this emergent form that, if you're a good musician, can be such an empowering experience for a client to be in. I mean, you can, if you really have the skills, you can bring a symphony for a client. You can allow them to be in this beautiful, ordered, emergent form and be symphonic and give them an experience that they've never had before. And most of our clients live in this very chaotic, disorganized world. Now, we can meet that, but in a way, be very careful if you meet a client's disorganized world, because that could be their autism, that could be their schizophrenia. Okay, so we need to make sense of that. So I think form is crucial to give the client something that they can feel safe in, and formless music doesn't do that. And one of the things I teach my students is, in terms of form, you don't go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If you think of that as forms, it's A, B, then you may want to repeat A, or then go to C and A, but that sense of, and it's a very simple form, rondo form, it's basically rondo form, is kind of crucial for clients, because it also gives them a sense of the developing relationship. If you can recapitulate, it's like, oh yes, we were here, we've come here, oh, now we can go back to the beginning again. I developed a theory, and I call it the architectural tonic. And it's been a great tool for me. And when I started that improvisation, I started on D. And that whole music I played was anchored to D. And that often is a great way to have an architectural tonic for a session, because it doesn't mean then you're getting into formed modulations. And I always joke with students that it sort of sits over the top of my head, that note is something that everything comes back to. And it's been a great tool for me, my improvising. So a tonic note might come from my perceptions of the client. I worked with a client who would always come down the corridor singing around an E flat or an E. So he would, through his humming, he would dictate the architectural tonic. So the best architectural tonics come from the client. Or the client might come in and hit a note. It's an A. Then you would make that your architectural tonic. I believe really firmly that when you're with a client in therapy, that you have to produce the finest music you can for that client. And anything other than that is to fail. So I'm sort of stating a nirvana sort of situation, but if a client comes in and makes a sound, the sound that I make in response to that is ultimate. So it may be one note, it then may be an interval, It may be a simple phrase, it may be a harmonic progression, but that every note that I play in response to the client has to have some intent and meaning. There was a guy who'd had an operation. He was completely passive and blank, and he looked really ill. And so what I would do I improvised for him, and he didn't really move. I gave him an instrument, but as I looked, and what I try and do, I talked earlier about moving myself back. If I'm playing music from a client, I try and put myself back so that the music will really speak to him. And he sat there, and all these drops came down his eyes. And I have many experiences of that, because for me, spirituality is about something that I cannot know, that the spiritual connections with music are beyond my knowing of that. And it doesn't necessarily speak to God, but it speaks to the power of music to move people in inextricably profound ways that I can't always know. And in palliative care, it was on a daily basis. It was on a daily basis that I would experience. And again, the spirituality in music is the non-verbal part, is the fact the music is able to reach, touch, be inside that person at a place where I may not know what it is, but the manifestations are so clear. And it became concrete for me. Spirituality in music was not an esoteric process. It was always really concrete. It's about God because it's about something bigger than who I am. I see God, or whatever name you might give that, as something that is bigger than myself. And so the music was God. And I was, in a way, the person that was the vessel to try and get them to that place, however that may be for them. And that's why I really take the job of the music therapist. I think music therapists should use music with the greatest caution. You know, we really need to think about the music that we give clients, because we have this potential to allow them to have these profound, godlike experiences through music. And we're the tools to do that. And it's kind of scary.
It makes you a little priest-like.
Yes, I hope not, but I worked with a young man in his 20s that was dying, and I had this sounding bowl, and I went with a physiotherapist, and we did these relaxation sessions, and we would go in the last couple of days of his life 3 times a day, and I would put the bowl on him, and because he was so racked with pain, and I remember he was the day before he died, and he suddenly opened his eyes and he went, "It's also enlightened." What the physiotherapist said after that, this was the one time when he wasn't grounded. You know, when you're ill, you're racked with pain, pain grounds you. We were able to give him that experience of flying, of not being grounded to his immediate, which is why I think he said it. Yeah. Well, and I think for me the extraordinary thing, because I teach full time and I use case studies, or stories. Like, I don't have any of the recordings of the guy that I just spoke to you about, but when I teach from them, and I teach from them every day, I remember exactly everything. I can see the room, I can see who was there, I can almost smell the smells, I can see the window, I could describe to it accurately. And that experience I told you must have been 20 years ago. And yet I can remember it as clear as if it was yesterday. And I talk about it a lot at work and play examples, and it's quite hard. Sometimes I just try and cut myself away from it because the memories of it are painful. I mean, so I think in going back to the spirituality thing, you know, being a priest and all that, actually I didn't always want to do it because actually it hurt and it was painful. It wasn't like, ooh, there's this spiritual experience, aren't I being wonderful, I'm a great therapist. Actually, it was really not easy. And I didn't always want to do it. It was my job, and, you know, I knew I had to fulfill my job, but I I didn't like it. But I mean, musician first. I remember I used to go into the hospice, and the hospice I worked at was in a hospital, and some days I go, how did I get here? You know, I'm trained as a musician. What am I doing in the middle of this hospital? It was really weird. Teaching clinical improvisation is a very matter-of-fact science, and from the way I teach it, and I was trained in the Nordhoff-Robbins approach, which actually has a very clear pedagogy. So at Laurier I have a very clear pedagogy, and it starts with going back to the fundamentals of the tone, and then the interval. And then, as I said before, one of the things students find most hard is they have to be able to improvise an A theme, and repeat it, and then a B phrase, and repeat it, and then repeat the A phrase. And it sounds very simple, but I've had lots of students crying, and like, I can't do it. So I think learning to improvise clinically is a science. You know, going through the modes, it's really going back to what is music, you know, and the building blocks of music. And I was a musician before I went into therapy, but it's like when I did the Nordhoff-Robbins training, it took me right back to square one, and I dismantled everything I knew about music, and then I rebuilt it again in a clinical setting. So there's 2 years at the graduate level, 3 hours a week, where this phenomena of clinical musicianship is taught, and you have to practice, and then you have to come in and then play, because what happens is students need to learn the conscious ability to play music and all the idioms and the different styles, so that when they get in the session they can put it to the back of the head.